The Moonfire Rite lasts from first dark until the third bell, and in all my years I had never once been late to it. I was never late to anything. My council called it a virtue. My wolf called it something colder, the habit of a man who trusted ceremony more than he trusted himself. I stood at the edge of the torchlit clearing, my second, Wren, at my shoulder, the pine smoke thick, and the sky above the Fen Vareth canopy salted with stars. Around the outer ring, 24 wolves of the hold stood still as carved stone. At the center of the clearing, the standing stones of the Old Moon Way formed a long corridor of shadow, and at the far end of that corridor, the council's chosen woman was waiting. Her name was Sela, the daughter of the Greywood Alliance. She had arrived 3 days prior, quiet and correct, her packmark visible at her wrist, her bearing exactly as described. My council had spent 6 months selecting her. The Moonfire Rite required only that I walk the corridor, reach her, and press my lips to her hand. The bond would decide the rest. If it found us, it would wake. If it did not, we would proceed to a formal alliance match in the morning, and I would take a council-arranged Luna who was not my fated mate, and serve my pack the way I had served it for 11 years. Without complaint, without self-pity, and without expecting anything the moon had not already promised me. I had made my peace with that, or I believed I had. "The bell has rung," Wren said quietly. I nodded. I straightened my cloak, drew a breath of cold pine and wood smoke, and walked into the corridor. The torches were placed at the outer ring and nowhere else. The Moonway's corridor ran between stone and shadow, and you walked it without light by design. The tradition was old, older than Fen Vareth itself, brought north by my forebears when they claimed the snowlands. The darkness stripped the approach bare, no ceremony, no pageantry, only the alpha and the intended and whatever the night chose to make of them. I walked. Halfway down the corridor I heard something I had not expected. A voice. Not the stillness of a woman waiting. A voice low and unhappy saying, "Oh, come on," in the way a person says it when they have been arguing with a situation and losing. There was the sound of cloth snagging on something, a pause, and then a barely audible, "Please, I just need to get through." I stopped. That was not Sela. I did not know how I knew. I had spoken perhaps 30 words to the woman across 3 days, but this voice had an entirely different shape. Lower, quick-paced, annoyed at a thorn bush of all things. I took 2 more steps forward. The figure I found in the dark was smaller than I'd expected, half twisted to free the hem of her traveling cloak from where it had caught on the stones at the base of the corridor wall. She had a canvas satchel over one shoulder, fat with something wrapped in cloth. She had not seen me. She was focused entirely on the thorn bush. I reached forward in the dark, not for her hand. I had meant to speak. To say something courteous and bewildered, like, "You're in the wrong place," because she clearly was, and someone should tell her, and I was the only someone available. What I actually did was take hold of her wrist to keep her from startling backward when she realized she was not alone. And then everything stopped. Not slowly, not with a gradual warmth or a building pressure. It stopped the way a long-held breath finally releases, completely and all at once, and something I had not known I was carrying put itself down. She went very still. I did not move. I have heard fated bond accounts from others. I have heard them described as fire, as a blow, as a sound like bells. What I felt in that moment was nothing so dramatic and nothing so comfortable. It was a recognition, the kind that happens not in the mind but somewhere behind it, in whatever part of a wolf-blooded man is older than language. I knew her. I did not know her name, her face, her history. I knew her the way you know a road that has always been yours, the way you know the weight of your own sword, not from thought, but from every moment you have spent without it. My wolf, who had been still and composed for 11 years, turned to face her like a man turning toward a fire in the cold. She said, very carefully, "I am deeply sorry. I took the wrong path from the kitchen gate. I'm delivering the winter herb order to the hold stores, and someone has moved the storeroom lanterns, and I ended up here, and I am not, I promise I am not, attempting to interfere with anything." I said, "I know." She finally looked up. I still could not see her face clearly. The torches were behind me, and the light at the corridor's edge only reached far enough to make the shape of her, not the details. I saw the satchel, the practical cloak, the dark braid that had come partly undone, and I saw that she was looking at me, the way people look at things that have not yet resolved themselves into something they can name. She said, "You're the Alpha King." "Yes. And I have interrupted the Moonfire Rite." "You have." There was a pause that lasted approximately 3 seconds. In that time, I felt the bond settle further, the way a building settles into its foundation on a cold night. Not collapsing, not breaking, simply finding where it had always been meant to rest. She said very evenly, "I'm going to walk backward out of this corridor now, and I'm going to return the herb delivery tomorrow morning, and I am going to apologize to everyone who needs apologizing to." "Wait," I said. The word came out before I had decided to say it. She waited. I did not know what I intended to follow it with. The protocol was clear. The Moonfire Rite was ongoing. The council's chosen woman was at the corridor's far end. I was an Alpha King who had never in 11 years deviated from what duty required. And standing here in the dark with a stranger's wrist in my hand and my wolf turned toward her like a compass needle, I was not certain I knew what deviation even felt like. I said, "What is your name?" "Corra," she said. "Corra Vane. I supply the border settlements between here and the Ashfen Ridge. Herbs, salves, wound packing, fever drafts. I have a contract with your hold's head healer. I've been delivering here for 3 years." 3 years. She had been delivering to my hold for 3 years, and I did not know her name. I released her wrist. Not because I wanted to, and that wanting, that precise reluctance, was itself something I had no precedent for. I released it because she had not given me any indication that she wanted me to hold it, and I was still, at least technically, the alpha who knew the difference between what he wanted and what he was permitted. "You should go," I said. "There's a path to the left of the outer ring that leads back to the kitchen gate. One of my wolves will walk with you." She nodded. She turned to go. Then she stopped. She turned back. "Your wrist," she said, her voice careful and low. I looked down. The mark was there. A wolf moon shape, deep blue-gray at the center and silver at the edge. The size of a thumbprint, on the inside of my left wrist. I had not felt it appear. I could not say when it had arrived. But it was there, as certain as stone. And it was glowing. "I see mine as well," she said, very quietly. She held out her arm. In the faint edgelight from the outer torches, I could just make it out. The same shape, the same size, the same silver-edged glow, on the inside of her wrist. Not blazing, not burning, simply there, the way stars are there. Not asking for anything, only being undeniably, permanently present. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she said, in a voice so composed it startled me, "I realize this is an extraordinary complication." "Yes," I said. "I want you to know I didn't arrange this." "I know," I said. "Believe me, I know." The Moonfire Rite ended without a bond. Sella of the Greywood Alliance withdrew with her dignity intact and a message to her pack that the night had not found a match. The truth, as far as it went, though the full truth would require a longer conversation with my counsel in the morning. Ren walked Corra back to the kitchen gate. I exchanged 3 quiet, careful words with Sella at the edge of the clearing. She was a composed woman, and the look she gave my wrist was brief and sufficient and entirely without resentment. I was grateful for it. I did not deserve it, but I was grateful. Then I stood in the emptied clearing for a long time, looking at the mark on my wrist, listening to the torches burn down. The 24 wolves of the hold had dispersed to their posts, their footsteps quiet on the pine needle floor. The smoke from the outer ring torches rose straight in the windless cold, unhurried, as if the night had decided there was no longer any ceremony to keep, and it might as well relax. I flexed my left hand slowly, and watched the mark catch the last of the firelight. Wolf moon shape, deep blue-gray at the center, silver at the edge. The kind of mark the old songs described, and I had always held the old songs at a professional distance, because an alpha king who takes his governance cues from songs is not long for his counsel's patience. And yet, my wolf was not still any longer. After 11 years of composure, he had the energy of something that has been given an answer to a question it had stopped expecting to have answered. He was not pacing, he was simply turned, completely and without apology, toward wherever in Fen Varath Corra Vane currently was. And he had no intention of turning back. I thought about the voice in the dark. Oh, come on. The absolute genuine annoyance of it. The particular way a person sounds when they have been entirely practical their whole life, and the universe has handed them a thorn bush at the worst possible moment. I thought about the composed way she had stood thereafter, both hands around nothing, her wrist in mine, and said, "I am deeply sorry. I took the wrong path from the kitchen gate." I did not know her. I had held her wrist for 30 seconds in the dark. And yet the mark on my left wrist glowed exactly as the old song said it would, and my wolf was pointed toward the kitchen gate like a sundial toward the sun, and I was standing alone in a cleared ceremony space at the 11th hour of night, and I found I had absolutely no interest in pretending any of that was ordinary. I made myself go to bed. I lay awake until the 5th bell. At dawn, I called Wren. "Find the woman who delivers herbs to the hold," I said. "Her name is Corra Vane. She came through last night. I'd like to speak with her before she leaves the valley." Wren looked at my wrist. He had served at my side through 3 border campaigns, 2 difficult succession challenges, and 6 years of council negotiations, and I had not once seen him uncertain of what expression to arrange his face into. He was briefly uncertain now. Not because he was surprised, I thought. He had seen the mark at the clearing's edge when I emerged, but because he was doing the fast, quiet calculation that good seconds do when a situation has changed significantly and they are working out what to say first. He had the good sense not to say anything. His silence said enough. "I'm going to deal with this correctly," I said, which was, in retrospect, a very strange thing to say about one's fated mate, but I meant it in the best possible way. I had a pact depending on me, a council expecting an explanation, an alliance to renegotiate with care, and a bond that had arrived in the dark without so much as asking my permission. Dealing with it correctly seemed the least I could manage. It was not the most romantic framing in the history of Fen Vareth, but I had always been better at governance than poetry, and I saw no reason to pretend otherwise at the 5th bell on No Sleep. She was in the kitchen courtyard when Wren brought her to me, packing the empty crates her delivery had come in. The morning light was the clear, cold kind that happens after frost, and she looked up when I came through the courtyard arch with the wariness of someone who was not certain if she had done something wrong. In the light, I could see her properly for the first time. She was perhaps 30, perhaps a little older. The border work kept a person lean and weathered. Her braid was repinned from the night before, but the same dark brown. Her eyes were the gray-green of the Ashfen Hills in autumn, and they met mine directly, which was not always the reaction I got from people I had surprised in corridors. She said, "My lord." "I owe you an apology," I said, "for last night. You came on legitimate business and walked into something you hadn't been warned about. That's a failure of my hold's hospitality, not any fault of yours." She looked at me for a beat. Then she said, "That's a generous way to read a situation you didn't choose." "You didn't choose it either." "No," she agreed. She looked down at her wrist, briefly. The mark was still there, quieter in daylight than it had been in the dark, but present. "I want to be honest with you. I know what the mark means. I've been in Wolfpack holds my whole adult life. I'm not going to pretend I don't understand. What would you like to do about it?" I said. It was, perhaps, an unusual way to address a fated bond. My counsel would have handled it differently. They would have produced documents, cited precedent, discussed the implications for the Greywood Alliance at some length. But I found, standing in the cold morning light with my wolf turned entirely in her direction, that I was more interested in what she wanted than in what the documents said. She considered that for a moment. "I'd like to have breakfast," she said finally. "If that's permitted. I've been traveling since before dawn, and I'd like to think before I make any decisions of consequence." I said, "Follow me." We ate in the small hall off the kitchen, which I had not used in years. It was a room for the hold's working staff, low-ceilinged and warm from the adjacent ovens, and I had chosen it because it was the only place in Fen Vareth where I could be reasonably certain my counsel would not find me for at least an hour. Wren posted himself outside the door. I poured the tea. Corra set her satchel on the bench beside her and wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the table for a long moment before she looked at me. "I have a route," she said. 7 settlements, Fen Vareth to the Ashfen Ridge and back. It takes 6 weeks. I've been running it for 4 years, and the settlements depend on it. The Holloway Ridge can't get fever draft any other way in winter." "I know," I said. I had signed the supply contracts myself, though I was now regretting that I had not read the names attached to them more carefully. "I'm not saying I won't consider whatever this is," she said. "I'm not saying that. But I need you to understand that I'm not free to simply arrive. I have commitments. There are places that need what I carry. I understand, I said. She looked at me sideways, as though she'd expected argument. You're not going to tell me those things can be arranged for by someone else? They can be, I said, but they're your roots, and you know them better than anyone I'd put in your place. And I've spent 11 years respecting duty over preference. I'm not about to ask you to abandon yours at the first conversation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You had the Moonfire Rite last night. You had a woman chosen and waiting. Yes. Did you want it to have found a match? I thought about that honestly. I had stopped letting myself want things I didn't think were coming, I said. There's a practical sanity to that. But I don't think practical sanity is the same as not wanting. She nodded slowly, as if that tracked with something she'd been working out herself. I'm going to finish my route, she said. 6 weeks. I'll be back through Fen Vareth at the end of it. If the bond is still, it will be, I said. She looked at me. There was something careful and searching in it. You're very certain of something you've known for 12 hours, she said. My wolf has been certain since last night, I said. I'm working on catching up. Something in her face shifted, not a smile exactly, but the thing that comes before a smile when a person is still deciding whether the situation warrants one. She looked down at her tea. The mark on her wrist caught the kitchen light and held it quietly. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, I said. I will not pretend the 6 weeks were easy. I had a council that wanted an explanation, a Greywood alliance to renegotiate with careful courtesy, and a wolf who had decided that 12 hours of acquaintance was more than sufficient grounds for permanent commitment. Wren, who had served at my side for 9 years, watched me sit through a week of administrative meetings with the slightly pained patience of a man watching someone try to put a fire out with a coat. The council explanation took 3 sessions. The bond mark was incontrovertible evidence, but councils are not in the business of taking incontrovertible evidence at face value when there are also alliance trade agreements to consider, and my counsel was thorough in all things. I sat through the questions with what I hoped was appropriate gravity. The pack lore keeper Deva examined the mark on the second day, asked me 4 precise questions about the moment of contact, and wrote 2 pages of notes without comment. When she was done, she folded the pages and said, The hold's precedents are clear. The Moonfire corridor accepts who it will. She said it the way she said most things, with the serenity of someone who has seen enough Alpha Kings to know that the Moon's arrangements tend to outlast the Council's objections. Greywood took longer. I wrote the letters myself, and I was careful with them. Sella had done nothing wrong. Her father had done nothing wrong. The alliance terms that had made the match desirable in the first place were still real and worth addressing. I spent 4 days working out an arrangement that was honest and fair, and that left the Greywood Alliance in a better position than the one they'd had before I walked into the Moonfire corridor. It was the right thing to do, and it also occupied enough of my attention that I was not spending my evenings reviewing supply manifests, which Wren found encouraging until he noticed I was reviewing supply manifests in the mornings instead. You could write to her, he said, on the 8th day. She's on a supply route, I said. Not a pleasure tour. Border station messengers run those roads in under 4 days. She asked for 6 weeks. I said, I'm going to give her 6 weeks. He said nothing. But the next morning there were 7 long-distance supply manifests on my desk, none of which required my direct attention, all of which noted a border settlement named Holloway Ridge at the top of the route sheet. I read them all. I moved 2 supply depot schedules to be certain they'd be in place before the first snows. I noted that the eastern Ashfen route ran along a river crossing that had no escort relay post for 50 miles. I added one. I told myself I was doing it for the good of the border network, and it was only partly a lie. My wolf spent those weeks the way a hound spends time when it knows the direction and cannot go. Not frantic, contained, and very aware of the containment. I had not known he could be so patient. I had not known I could. On the 3rd week, a message came from Corra herself. Not a letter, exactly, more a note folded into the margin of a route correction she'd sent through the supply registry. It said, The Ashfen fever drat request was doubled this year. I'm staying 3 days longer at Holloway Ridge. Back in 7 weeks, not 6. C. Vane. And then, below that, in smaller script, the mark is still there. I read it twice, then I read it a 3rd time. I noticed that her handwriting was not particularly elegant. Practical, quick, the handwriting of someone who writes while standing up and means to get through the sentence efficiently. I noticed that she had added the postscript in smaller script, which suggested she had finished the official note and then stopped and written it anyway, which suggested she had wanted me to know and had weighed whether to say so and had decided yes. I put the note in the inside pocket of my riding cloak. I told myself that was simply practical. It had route correction information I might need to pass to the supply registry. I told myself that for approximately 6 days, until I stopped pretending and simply left it where it was. She came through the valley gate on a morning in early winter, 2 weeks past the first frost. I was in the outer yard by accident. I had been reviewing the gate logs before the third bell and simply had not gone inside yet, which I was choosing not to examine too closely. Her horse was a steady-footed gray cob, and she was riding with her satchel and 3 additional packs strapped behind the saddle, which told me Holloway Ridge had sent her back with a return order. She saw me and pulled up. "You're out early," she said. "Gate logs," I said. "You're later than 7 weeks." Holloway Ridge also had a secondary fever outbreak. I stayed to help manage it. She swung down from the horse. She looked tired. The good kind. The kind that comes from having done something necessary and done it completely. She looked at my wrist, then at her own. "Still there," she said. "Still there," I said. She looked at me with that searching, careful expression I had been carrying in my memory for 7 weeks. "You waited." "Of course I waited." "You didn't send anyone. You asked for time. Sending someone would not have been giving you time." She was quiet for a moment. Around us the yard was beginning to wake. Stable wolves crossing the cobbles, the far bell ringing the 3rd hour. She did not seem bothered by them. She had been moving through wolf pack holds for 4 years, and she had the particular ease of someone who has learned that the wolves are not the most difficult part of any given day. "I thought about it," she said. "The whole route. I thought about it a great deal." And I don't think fate made an error," she said. "I don't think it found the wrong woman. I think I was always going to end up in that corridor. I think I've probably been headed here since before I started running the border supply route, and I just didn't know it." Something in my chest that had been holding itself carefully for 7 weeks settled without ceremony. "Neither did I," said. "In retrospect, I think my wolf knew before I ever set foot in the corridor. He simply could not have explained it in terms I would have listened to." She laughed, short and real, the laugh of someone who has been thinking about something for a long time and finally gets to say it out loud. It was, I thought, the best sound I had heard in 11 years. "Come inside," I said. "It's cold. I owe you a proper breakfast, one where I'm not apologizing for anything." "Are you certain you're not apologizing for anything?" she said, falling into step beside me. "You did upend my route schedule. The Ashfen Supply Committee is going to want to know why Holloway Ridge is getting a second priority designation." "I've reviewed the manifests," I said. "The Ashfen routes are underserved by the central depot. The prioritization is warranted entirely on supply grounds and will hold up under any council review." She looked at me. "You read the supply manifests," she said. "All of them," I said. "I've been managing the border route schedule since shortly after our last conversation." There was a pause. "That's either very efficient governance or a very long way to avoid writing a letter," she said. "Both," I said. "Probably mostly both." I brought her to the small hall again. The kitchen staff, who had apparently kept track of this situation in the efficient, low-voiced way that kitchen staffs keep track of everything, had already set the table. There were 2 cups. There was, I noticed, the particular honey bread that was made only when someone had decided a morning called for it, and it was still warm. Ren, when he appeared at my shoulder 3 minutes after we sat down, had the face of a man choosing his moment with great care. "Council is at the 7th bell," he said to me. He looked at Corra once, briefly, with the satisfaction of someone who had predicted a thing and had now been vindicated. "I'll let them know you'll be a few minutes late." "You'll let them know I'll be on time," I said. "Of course," he said. He was already leaving. Corra looked at me across the table. "He seems very pleased with himself." "He's been pleased with himself for 7 weeks," I said. "He's owed it." She smiled properly, this time. It did something to the room that I could not have put into a council report but was entirely real. The mark on her wrist caught the warmth from the ovens and glowed, just faintly, the same soft blue-gray it had been in the corridor, and I realized I had been carrying a memory of that color in the front of my mind for all 7 weeks without knowing it. "I have another route in the spring," she said. "Ashfen Ridge to the North Coast settlements. It takes 8 weeks." "I know," I said. "I've read the route sheets." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm not asking you to stop," I said. "The North Coast settlements need those routes, and you know those roads better than anyone I have." I paused. "But I would like to know the routes in advance, and I would like to send an additional wolf for the North Coast leg. The Ashfen roads past the snow line are not safe to run alone, and they haven't been for 2 years. I should have doubled the escort before now." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "You're not asking me to stay," she said, not quite a question. "You have work," I said. "Real work, that real people depend on. I'm not going to ask you to give that up. I'm asking you to let me make sure you come back from it." She looked at me for a long moment, that gray-green gaze, steady and searching. Outside the small hall, the hold was waking fully now. Boots on cobblestones, the clang of the water bell at the outer well, the low conversation of the morning guard change. She was not uncomfortable in it. She had never been uncomfortable in wolf pack holds, and I thought that probably said more about who she was than anything she had yet told me directly. "I'll think about the North Coast route," she said. "That's all I'm asking," I said. She picked up her tea. She looked at the mark on her wrist again, thoughtful, the way a person looks at something they are still accustoming themselves to owning. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "In the corridor, when you reached for me," she paused, "you said you meant to speak, to say I was in the wrong place. I did, but you took my wrist instead." "Yes," I said. "Why?" I thought about that for a moment. It was not a small question. "You were about to pull away from the thorn bush," I said, "and step backward into a torch stand. I was going to catch you." She blinked. "Was I?" "The torch stand was directly behind your left heel. You couldn't see it in the dark." There was a pause. "So," she said, slowly, "the bond that has upended both our lives found its moment because you were trying to prevent me from backing into a torch." "Fate," I said, "has always had a particular sense of occasion." She started laughing. It was different from before. Fuller, unguarded. The laugh of someone who has given a situation their full, honest assessment and found it genuinely ridiculous. I found that I was laughing with her, not the polite, controlled version that served me in council meetings, actually laughing, because the story of how I met my fated mate was going to be, for the rest of my life, completely impossible to tell with any dignity whatsoever. "I should put that in the hold records," she managed, eventually. "The Alpha King of Fenvareth and the herb supplier, a torch stand in the dark. If you tell Ren," I said, "he will repeat it at every significant occasion for the next 40 years. "He seems like someone who would," she agreed, and she was still smiling when she said it, and the mark between us was steady and content and entirely without drama, as though it had been waiting a long time for this specific table and this specific morning, and had no patience left for anything showy. The council meeting at the 7th bell was not comfortable, but it was clear. The bond mark was its own precedent. My packlore keeper, a woman named Diva who had served 3 alphas before me and had the serenity of someone who has seen nearly everything, looked at my wrist, looked at the documentation Ren produced, and said, "The hold is settled," in the tone she reserved for things that were, in her professional estimation, decided by forces more permanent than council votes. The Greywood alliance took longer. Selah's father was a reasonable man, and the situation, the Moonfire corridor, the wrong meeting, the undeniable mark, was not one that assigned blame to anyone. I arranged a compensatory trade agreement that addressed what Greywood had genuinely needed from the alliance in the first place, and by the time the winter moon was full again, the correspondence was closed and the documents signed. My council adapted. Councils always do, when they understand that the decision has already been made by something older than their precedents. What surprised me, what I had not predicted, in all those 7 weeks of supply manifests and careful restraint, was how quickly Fenvareth simply made room for her. She kept her routes through the spring. The North Coast leg ran with an additional wolf escort, as agreed, and she came back from it 8 weeks later with a secondary fever draft contract from 3 settlements that had never had reliable supply before, a detailed accounting of 3 road sections that needed relay post upgrades, and a quiet, direct report for my desk that was more thorough than anything my own Border Patrol officers had produced in a year. She had a particular gift, Wren told me, for finding out what a place needed before the place itself had quite formulated the question. He said it with the admiration of a man who respected competence, and with the tone of a man who had also decided he liked her, and I found both gratifying. The Hold's head healer said, somewhat archly, that she had been waiting for someone to take those North Coast routes seriously for 6 years, and was glad someone finally had. She said it to me directly, with the frankness of a woman who has been head healer to 3 alphas and considers pointed commentary part of the position. I thanked her and noted the relay post upgrades on the Capital Works list, and if she noticed that I had done so within 20 minutes of reading Corra's report, she was kind enough not to mention it. I began attending to the border supply records in a way I had not done before. Not because they required the Alpha's personal attention, they did not, but because they were the best map I had of where Corra was on any given week, and I found that knowing where she was had become something I did not want to be without. It was not anxious knowing. It was the particular, steady kind. The way you know the condition of a road you travel regularly. The way you know where every important thing in the hold is kept. Not because you need it this moment, but because you'd notice instantly if it moved. She had a room in the hold's guest wing, between routes. She spent time in the hold's herb stores, reviewing supply for the next route. She attended Deva's lore-keeping sessions twice, which apparently turned into a discussion of 300 years of bond-mark documentation that lasted 4 hours and which Deva described to me the next morning with the enthusiasm she reserved for subjects she had been waiting to discuss with someone qualified. She ate most evenings in the small hall off the kitchen, which the kitchen staff had adopted as the appropriate room for people who wanted food and conversation without ceremony. I ate there too, when the council calendar permitted, which was more often than it had been before. She was easy to be around in the way that people are easy when they have nothing to prove and nowhere to be except exactly where they are. I had spent 11 years being managed and briefed and advised and negotiated with, and I had not noticed how much of my day was spent being read correctly, until I was sitting across a table from someone who watched me with the same directness she watched everything else, who asked questions she actually wanted answers to, and who did not adjust her expression based on whether I seemed to want a different answer than the true one. When she came back, when the stable wolf sent word that the gray cob was at the outer gate, I found reasons to be in the outer yard, reviewing gate logs at unusual hours, with a frequency that no one commented on, because everyone at Fen Vareth had, apparently, decided to be kind about it. One evening in late spring she found me at the outer rampart, where I went when the council sessions ran long and I needed the cold air and a view that did not have a ledger attached to it. The council had spent 4 hours that day debating the northern grain tithe, and I had come to the rampart to remember that the valley was real, and the grain tithe debate was, in the full scope of things, temporary. She came through the rampart door with 2 cups from the kitchen, having apparently decided that someone who had been in the council room since the 3rd bell deserved hot tea without being asked. She set one beside me on the stone parapet. She did not make a comment about the council, or ask how the session had gone, or fill the air with the careful solicitude that people sometimes offered when they thought I needed managing. She just stood there and drank her tea and looked at the valley. We stood like that for a while, the kind of silence that does not require filling. I told the Holloway Ridge Supply Committee about the escort arrangement, she said. They want to know if it applies to the summer routes as well. Yes, I said. They seemed pleased. She paused. They also sent a formal thank you to the Alpha King of Fen Varath for the secondary fever draft priority. They were very earnest about it. I read it, I said. It arrived this morning. And I may have passed it to Wren with instructions to file it prominently, I said, in case anyone on the council required a reminder that border supply prioritization has measurable outcomes. She looked at me with that quiet, considering expression. You're very good at doing things for reasons that are also true and not the only reason. It is, I said, one of the more useful habits a king can develop. She smiled. We stood in the last of the evening light, the valley below us turning amber and gray-green, in the particular way it did at the edge of spring. The mark on my wrist was warm, not glowing, the easy, settled warmth of something that had found its place and no longer needed to announce itself. I was thinking, she said after a while, that I might move the North Supply Base to Fen Vareth, rather than Ashfen. The roads north out of here are better maintained, and the storage access is more reliable. I kept my face composed. That would be practical, I said. Yes, she said. Strictly on supply grounds. Of course, I said. There was a pause. Ren is going to find out, she said. Ren already knows, I said. Ren has known since the day you left on the first route. He has been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for you to say it out loud. She laughed, that full, unguarded laugh. I turned to look at her and I thought, as I had been thinking for 7 months in various supply manifests and gate log reviews and 7-bell council meetings, that I had been 11 years building a life designed to hold its shape in the absence of this, and that it had been a reasonable life, and that this was so entirely better that the comparison was almost not a comparison at all. I should tell you something, she said. Yes? The night I came through the corridor, I actually knew where the kitchen storeroom was. I've been coming to this hold for 3 years. I did not get lost. I looked at her. The supply delivery was legitimate, she said quickly. I do have a contract. I had every intention of going to the storeroom, but I had seen the outer ring torches go up on my way in, and I wanted to see the corridor stones. I'd heard about them. I thought if I walked close to the outer edge of the clearing, I could see the stonework without interrupting anything. A pause. I miscalculated the edge. I thought about that for a long moment. So, I said, you were trespassing at the outer edge of a sacred Moonfire Rite because you wanted to look at the stonework. The Moonway stones are 400 years old, and I find old stonework genuinely interesting, she said, with great dignity. And I found you because you caught your cloak on one of them. Yes. Another long pause. Fate, I said, truly does have a particular sense of occasion. In my defense, she said, I did not plan to change anyone's life. I was looking at old stones. In my defense, I said, I was trying to prevent you from stepping on a torch stand. She looked at me, and the evening light was in her eyes, and the mark on my wrist was warm and still and entirely certain. And I thought that if I had been given 100 Moonfire Rites, and 100 council-chosen candidates, and 100 corridors to walk in the dark, I would not have found my way to this rampart, and this evening, and this woman, by any route other than the wrong one. Come inside, I said, it's getting cold. She picked up her cup. She took one more look at the valley, the way she always looked at a place before leaving it, attentively, as though storing it somewhere she could find again. Ren is going to make a formal announcement at the winter gathering, isn't he? She said. Almost certainly, I said. And there'll be documents. There will be a great many documents. And the Ashfen Supply Committee will have to be notified. I'll draft the letter myself, I said. I have been told I am reasonably efficient at correspondence. She smiled. She walked beside me back toward the hall door. The mark on her wrist and the mark on mine moved together the way they always did when we were close. Not blazing, never blazing, just quietly certain, the way stars don't announce themselves but are there whenever you look up. At the hall door she stopped. She turned to look at me with the clear-eyed directness that had startled me from the first moment, and had not stopped startling me since, and she said, I'm glad it was the wrong corridor. I thought of all the right corridors I had walked in 11 years. Every ceremony, every council-approved path, every deliberate, measured, appropriate step. So am I said, more than I know how to say. She went inside. I stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the old timber of the frame, listening to the sound of the hold settling into evening, the kitchen fire, the distant wolves, the bell at the water post, the ordinary and irreplaceable life of a place that had become, in the way the best things become, more itself for having her in it. I thought about the Moonway corridor, and the torch stand she had nearly stepped on, and the thorn bush, and the 400-year-old stones she had come to look at and found something else entirely. I thought about the note in my riding cloak's inside pocket, still there, months later, because I had never been able to argue myself into moving it, and the 2 words in smaller script at the bottom of it, which had done more for 11 years of careful composure than any of my governance had managed on its own. Fate, I had said, and she had said, I was looking at old stones. The truth, I thought, was that there was no version of Fen Verath in which I had not eventually found her. The corridor had simply been the particular door. The thorn bush and the torch stand and the wrong path from the kitchen gate, all of it had been, in the end, the road arriving where it had always been going. I had walked ceremony paths for 11 years. It had taken one wrong turn to walk the right one. Then I followed her inside, and closed the door behind us, and let the cold stay out where it belonged.